The envoy from the Theocracy gazed out the carriage window as it slowly made its way up the road toward Hades' seat, the capital of the Shadow Empire and the dwelling place of the current Dark Lord. The carriage moved steadily, surrounded by the grim landscapes that characterized this strange land. As it circled a central fountain adorned with artistic reliefs, it finally came to a halt before a pair of imposing black metallic doors. With a soft click, the carriage door opened, revealing a werebeast butler who stood ready to assist. The envoy could tell the butler was a werebeast by his slitted, reptilian eyes, though he couldn't discern what kind of beast the butler might transform into. It was said that some of the cardinals back in the Theocracy could identify such creatures at a glance, but he was merely a bishop, a high-ranking one, yes, but still just a bishop. "We welcome the envoy from the Theocracy," the butler said, offering a polite bow. The bishop stepped out of the carriage, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment at the lack of a grand welcoming party. As a high-ranking member of the Theocracy on a diplomatic mission, he had expected more, perhaps a procession, or at least a few dignitaries to greet him. Instead, there was only the butler and a handful of guards. To the bishop, this sparse reception felt like an insult, though he reminded himself that expecting anything more from these so-called savages might have been too optimistic. "A rather modest welcome, I see," the bishop remarked, unable to hide the edge in his voice. "By order of His Most August Majesty," the butler replied smoothly, offering another bow. "He instructed us not to roll out the full welcome for someone of your stature." The bishop was taken aback by the butler's bluntness. He bit his tongue, knowing that any retort here, in the heart of the Shadow Empire, would be unwise. Without witnesses from his own retinue, the Dark Lord's men could twist his words however they pleased. He decided to let the comment slide, though it left a bitter taste in his mouth. "Very well," the bishop said curtly. "Inform your master that I have arrived." The butler's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his features before he regained his composure. "That won't be necessary, sir. His Majesty is already awaiting your arrival with great anticipation. Please, follow me." The butler gestured toward the massive doors, which began to creak open as if responding to an unseen command. The bishop stepped inside, doing his best to conceal his awe. For a nation of so-called backward races and primitives, the grandeur of the palace was astonishing. The artwork alone was enough to rival the great halls of the Theocracy's most sacred temples, where the angel Vespasia herself was said to reside. "This is the Hall of 1,000 Mirrors," the butler explained as they turned down a corridor lined with ornate, impeccably polished mirrors. The bishop had never seen anything like them. Even the finest mirrors in the Theocracy were mere polished metal compared to these masterpieces. "Dwarven craftsmanship?" the bishop asked, his tone tinged with condescension. He assumed that only the industrious dwarves, one of the few races the Shadow Empire tolerated, could produce such works. "Actually, sir, these were crafted in the Academy workshops," the butler replied, his voice calm and measured. The bishop's chest swelled with pride at the mention of the Academy. Though it was now a den of beasts and underraces, it had once been founded and led by the first hero of humanity, a man whose fall from grace was shrouded in mystery. The bishop couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, knowing that even in this land of monsters, the legacy of human ingenuity endured. They soon arrived at the throne room. The butler paused before the grand doors and turned to the bishop. "His Majesty, Dark Lord Helshep, has agreed to meet you alone. I have been instructed to advise you to speak freely. You may treat him with contempt if you wish." The bishop raised an eyebrow, unsure whether the butler was being sarcastic or sincere. Before he could respond, the doors swung open, revealing the throne room. Compared to the opulence of the rest of the palace, the throne room was surprisingly austere. The pillars were functional rather than decorative, and the throne itself was a simple wooden chair adorned with a single black gemstone on its headboard. The bishop stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room for the Dark Lord. To his surprise, the room appeared empty. He cleared his throat and called out, "Hello?" His voice echoed faintly against the stone walls. Suddenly, a playful voice broke the silence. "What ya got there?" Before the bishop could react, a lanky figure darted out from the shadows and snatched the sealed letter from his hands. "Hey! That is for the Dark Lord's eyes only, you fool!" the bishop shouted, his face red with anger. The figure, a man dressed in a simple, slightly ragged suit, danced out of reach with surprising agility. He examined the letter with a mischievous grin. "What an important-looking seal. Did the angel send this one?" he teased, continuing to evade the bishop's attempts to grab the letter. "No, it was the Council of Cardinals. Now return it, or there will be trouble." The bishop snarled, his patience wearing thin. "Trouble?" the man asked, tilting his head with mock curiosity. "Yes, trouble. Now fetch your master so we can discuss the contents of that letter." The man's grin widened as he strolled over to the ebony throne. The bishop had heard countless tales of the throne, how it would reduce anyone who touched it to dust unless they were the rightful Dark Lord. The man, however, seemed unfazed. He slumped into the throne with a casual air and broke the seal on the letter. You are Helshep," the bishop stammered, his voice tinged with disbelief. The man on the throne glanced up from the letter, his expression a mix of amusement and nonchalance. Oh yes, the one and only, Dark Lord and ruler of the Shadow Empire. Blah blah blah. I have so many titles. I actually keep a book just to list them all. But let's stick with my favorite title, the one my youngest daughter gave me. And what would that be?" the bishop asked, his curiosity momentarily outweighing his frustration. "The king of titles," Helshep declared with a chuckle before returning his attention to the letter. The bishop watched him closely, trying to gauge his reaction. Unlike most rulers the bishop had met, Helshep's face was an open book, displaying a whirlwind of emotions that made it impossible to predict his mood. "So, this letter is the deal?" Helshep asked, his tone shifting to one of mild interest. "Yes," the bishop replied, his voice steady. "And you're aware of its contents, I assume?" "Yes, I was present during the meeting when it was drafted. Though I have spoken of it to no one." Helshep leaned back in the throne, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. "Tell me, Bishop, what was your name again?" "Helbrand, sir." "Helbrand. Interesting name. So, tell me, Bishop Helbrand, are you disliked back in the Theocracy?" "Disliked?" Helbrand echoed, confused. As far as he knew, he was a rising star within the Theocracy, with growing influence and plenty of allies. "No, sir." "Then are you a fool?" "A fool?" Helbrand's face flushed with anger, but he bit his tongue to keep from lashing out. This man, this so-called Dark Lord, had ignored every rule of diplomatic etiquette. "It's just, the Theocracy wants me to legalize slavery in exchange for lasting peace," Helshep said, his tone casual, as if discussing the weather. Helbrand nodded. The Council of Cardinals had assured him that the offer was simple and agreeable. Only a madman would reject it, especially since their intelligence suggested that Helshep had been born and raised in the Secondian Kingdom, a nation built on the backs of slaves. "And the alternative is war?" Helshep asked, raising an eyebrow. "Sadly, yes," Helbrand replied, his voice firm. Helshep sighed and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Do you know of the foundation stones of this empire?" Helbrand shook his head. It was something he had never heard of, not even in passing. "I see. That explains a lot," Helshep said, his tone growing more serious. "When the empire was founded, the first Dark Lord, Hades, gathered the 7 sinful lords to aid him. Each of them set a rule that could never be broken by any successor. These rules were flexible enough to adapt over time but were ultimately unbreakable. Do you know what Gluttony's rule was?" "No, I do not," Helbrand admitted, his curiosity piqued. Gluttony, an orc from a race often enslaved, decreed that there would be no slavery in this land. This empire was founded by misfits, outcasts, and runaways from other continents. We are a people unwanted by others, and so we forged a paradise out of a volcanic wasteland. A land that values freedom and autonomy above all else. That is why any slave ship that enters our waters is captured, and the enslaved are offered a place to live here. Helbrand's confidence wavered. I was unaware, he stammered. But you grew up in the Secondian kingdom. Helshep cut him off with a wave of his hand. I was a peasant in that land. I saw how slaves were treated, and it disgusted me. But as a peasant, I had no power to help them. What of the slave mines? Or the debt slaves? Helbrand asked, clutching at straws. The ones working the mines are criminals serving hard labor sentences. Once their time is served, they are free to go. And even during their punishment, their rights are protected. As for the so-called debt slaves, they are guaranteed fair wages, and once their debt is repaid, they are free to choose their own path. They can even change employers during their service. So, you see, Bishop Helbrand, I am left with a dilemma. A dilemma? Helbrand asked, his voice barely above a whisper. If I let you return home unpunished after this insult, not just to me, but to the very principles this empire was founded upon, it would send the wrong message to my people. But if I kill you in a gruesome manner, it would start a war. Helshep's gaze bore into Helbrand, who felt a lump form in his throat. So, I am going to ask you some questions, Helshep continued, his tone calm but firm. You will answer them honestly. If you lie, I will consider the war option. Understood. Helbrand nodded vigorously, his heart pounding in his chest. First, I'll ask again. Are you disliked in your homeland? Because sending someone to deliver this message seems like a death sentence. Helbrand shook his head. He truly didn't know who might have set him up for this. All right, you don't know. Fair enough. Next question. Are you a fanatic? Are you willing to die for your cause? Again, Helbrand shook his head, this time more desperately. No? Good. I despise fanatics. I keep telling my Imperial Guard to protect the people before they protect me, but they never listen. All right, last question. Which hand is your dominant hand? The one you write with, the one you drink with, the one you can't bear to live without? I believe I have a way to satisfy both parties. Because, Helbrand, I may be a king of monsters, but I am still more human than your masters. I love this land that accepted an orphan from a no-name village. To betray its morals would be to betray myself, and I will commit no treason on this day. Helshep stepped down from the throne and approached Helbrand, kneeling before him so they were at eye level. Helbrand hadn't even realized he had fallen to his knees. So, right or left? Helshep asked, his voice calm but firm. Helbrand's mind raced as he tried to process Helshep's question. His dominant hand? What could the Dark Lord possibly intend to do with that information? The bishop's heart pounded in his chest, and he could feel the cold sweat forming on his brow. He glanced down at his hands, trembling slightly as he weighed his options. Finally, he managed to croak out a response. My right hand, Helbrand said, his voice barely above a whisper. Helshep nodded, his expression unreadable. Right hand it is, then. He stood up and turned to one of the guards who had been standing silently in the shadows. With a quick gesture, Helshep summoned the guard forward. The guard carried a small, ornate box, which he placed on the ground before the Dark Lord. Helbrand's eyes widened as Helshep opened the box, revealing a set of gleaming, razor-sharp tools. The bishop's stomach churned as he realized what was about to happen. He tried to back away, but the guards behind him held him firmly in place. Please. There must be another way, Helbrand pleaded, his voice trembling. Helshep's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. I'm afraid not, Bishop. This is the only way to satisfy both our principles and avoid war. But don't worry, I won't leave you helpless. My empire has some of the finest craftsmen in the world. They will ensure you have a replacement that is both functional and unique. Before Helbrand could protest further, Helshep motioned to the guards. They stepped forward, holding the bishop's right arm steady. Helbrand clenched his teeth, bracing himself for the pain. Helshep picked up a small, curved blade from the box and examined it for a moment before turning his attention back to Helbrand. This will only take a moment, Helshep said, his voice calm and reassuring. Try to stay still. The blade flashed, and Hellbrand let out a strangled cry as it sliced through his wrist. The pain was excruciating, but it was over quickly. Hellshep stepped back, allowing the guards to tend to the wound. They applied a strange, glowing salve that numbed the pain and stopped the bleeding almost instantly. Hellbrand stared in shock at the stump where his hand had been. He felt lightheaded, his vision swimming as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Hellshep knelt beside him once more, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You have shown great courage, Bishop Hellbrand," Hellshep said, his voice gentle. "I know this was not easy for you, but it was necessary. Remember, you are not leaving here empty-handed. My craftsmen will provide you with a replacement that will serve you well." Hellbrand could only nod weakly, his mind still reeling from the ordeal. The guards helped him to his feet, supporting him as they led him out of the throne room. As they walked, Hellbrand couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. He had survived, and though he had lost a hand, he had gained something far more valuable: his life. The journey back to the Theocracy was a blur for Hellbrand. The pain in his wrist had subsided, thanks to the salve provided by Hellshep's guards, but the emotional toll of the experience weighed heavily on him. He couldn't shake the image of Hellshep's calm, almost compassionate demeanor as he carried out the punishment. It was a stark contrast to the monstrous tyrant Hellbrand had been led to believe the Dark Lord was. When he finally arrived at the steps of the Northern Pantheon's temple, he was greeted by the sight of his mentor, the Cardinal of Benevolence. The Cardinal's warm smile and welcoming demeanor were a sharp contrast to the cold, calculating world Hellbrand had just left behind. "Ah, dearest Hellbrand, you've returned," the Cardinal said, his voice filled with genuine joy. "Come, let us discuss your journey in my private office." Hellbrand's heart sank as he followed the Cardinal into the temple. He had so many questions, so many doubts swirling in his mind. But as they entered the Cardinal's office, he knew that the answers he sought would not bring him comfort. The Cardinal of Benevolence gestured for Hellbrand to take a seat in his modest office. The room was simple, adorned with handmade trinkets and toys from the many children the Cardinal had mentored over the years. Hellbrand's eyes fell on a small wooden figurine he had given the Cardinal when he was just a boy. The memory brought a pang of nostalgia, but it was quickly overshadowed by the storm of emotions raging within him. "So, I am pleased to see you have returned safe and sound," the Cardinal began, his tone warm and fatherly. "Safe and sound," Hellbrand repeated, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. He held up his right arm, now ending in a stump wrapped in bandages. "Do you call this safe and sound?" The Cardinal's expression shifted slightly, but his smile never wavered. "Ah yes, I see you've encountered some difficulties, but you are alive and that is what matters." "Difficulties?" Hellbrand's voice rose, his frustration boiling over. "You sent me there knowing this would happen. You knew they would reject the offer, and you sent me anyway, knowing I might not return." The Cardinal leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. "Dear Hellbrand, you must understand that diplomacy is a delicate art. Sometimes, sacrifices must be made for the greater good." "The greater good?" Hellbrand's voice was a mixture of anger and despair. "What greater good? What was the purpose of sending me to my near death?" The Cardinal's smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "Very well, if you wish to know the truth, I will tell you. But you must understand that what I am about to say is not to be shared with anyone." "Do I have your word?" Hellbrand hesitated, then nodded. "You have my word." The Cardinal leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Hellbrand's. "The Theocracy is not just a religious institution, Hellbrand. It is a political entity, one that must maintain its influence and power. Over the centuries, the nations under our banner have grown complacent. They have begun to question why they should continue to pay tithes and bow to our authority. They have forgotten the fear that once united them." Hellbrand's eyes narrowed. "And what does that have to do with the Shadow Empire?" "The Shadow Empire," the Cardinal continued, "is a convenient enemy. A land of monsters, outcasts, and heretics. The common folk fear them, and that fear is a powerful tool. By provoking the Shadow Empire, we remind our allies why they need us. We give them a common enemy to rally against. So, this was never about peace, Hellbrand said, his voice hollow. This was about starting a war. Not just any war, the Cardinal corrected. A holy war. A crusade that will unite the nations under our banner once more. The Shadow Empire's refusal to legalize slavery will only fuel the flames. Many of the nations that have grown distant from us rely heavily on the slave trade. They will see this as an attack on their way of life and will join us willingly. Hellbrand felt a cold knot form in his stomach. And I was just a pawn in your game. A sacrificial lamb to provoke the enemy. The Cardinal's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked almost regretful. You were more than that, Hellbrand. You were a test. The gods needed to see if you were worthy of greater responsibility. And you have proven yourself. Your survival, despite the odds, is a sign of their favor. Hellbrand's mind raced as he tried to process the Cardinal's words. He had always believed in the righteousness of the Theocracy, in its mission to spread the light of the gods. But now he saw the cracks in that facade. The manipulation, the lies, the willingness to sacrifice lives for political gain. It was all too much. And what if I refused to play along? Hellbrand asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Cardinal's eyes hardened, and the warmth in his voice vanished. That would be unwise. You have seen too much, Hellbrand. You know too much. If you were to turn against us, it would not end well for you. But I do not believe it will come to that. You are a loyal servant of the gods, are you not? Hellbrand felt a chill run down his spine as he met the Cardinal's icy gaze. He had always seen the Cardinal as a father figure, a mentor who guided him with wisdom and compassion. But now he saw the truth. The Cardinal was a predator, and Hellbrand was his prey. I am loyal, Hellbrand said, his voice trembling. But I need time to process everything. The Cardinal's smile returned, though it lacked its usual warmth. Of course, my dear Hellbrand, take all the time you need. But remember, the gods are watching, and they do not look kindly on those who stray from the path. Hellbrand nodded, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He rose from his seat and left the office, his mechanical hand, a gift from the Shadow Empire, clenched tightly at his side. As he walked through the temple halls, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The eyes of the gods, or perhaps the eyes of the Cardinal's spies, followed his every move. In the days that followed, Hellbrand struggled to come to terms with what he had learned. He had always believed in the righteousness of the Theocracy, but now he saw it for what it truly was, a machine of power and control, fueled by fear and manipulation. The gods he had devoted his life to serving seemed distant, their light dimmed by the shadows of politics and ambition. But Hellbrand was not ready to give up. He had survived the Shadow Empire, and he would survive this. He would play the part expected of him, but deep down, he knew that his loyalty to the Theocracy had been shaken. Perhaps, in time, he would find a way to reconcile his faith with the harsh realities of the world. Or perhaps he would find a new path altogether. For now, he would bide his time, waiting for the right moment to act. The gods might be watching, but so was he. And he would not let their light be extinguished by the darkness of men. And so, the story of Bishop Hellbrand came to a close, or perhaps it was just the beginning. In a world of shadows and light, of monsters and men, he had found himself caught between two worlds. But in that tension, he had also found a glimmer of hope. A hope that, one day, the light of the gods would shine true, untainted by the ambitions of mortals. And until that day came, he would walk the path before him one step at a time.